Today I want to talk about art. I want to talk about what art can teach us, what it can teach us about the world, and what it can do for Jewish education. And I want to do it specifically by looking at the work of one artist, Mierle Laderman Ukeles. Now, Ukeles is a well-known artist. She's a performance artist and a visual artist. She's primarily studied as an environmental artist and a feminist artist. She's less often studied as a Jewish artist. But I would say to fully understand her art requires an understanding of her Jewish upbringing and her Jewish ideas. And I'm going to tell you why, and why I think this matters for the study of Jewish ideas, particularly ideas around ritual, cleansing, and repair. But first, I'd like for you to hear the more standard story. So picture this. It's late 60s, Mierle's a young art student at NYU. Her sculpture professor looks at her, sees that she's pregnant, and says, well, guess now you can't be an artist. That's one snapshot. Fast forward, Mierle and her husband Jack welcome their daughter to the world joyfully. And then people keep saying to her, well, do you do anything? So these experiences, which may be familiar to mothers here in the room, these experiences begin to accumulate, and Mierle becomes keenly aware of the fact that what she is doing as a mother is extremely important work. But there's no cultural language, and that's her words. There's no cultural language in the US at the time giving value to that work. So here she is divided, having felt previously valued as an artist, and now feeling culturally invisible and unvalued as a mother. She's frustrated. She sets out to undo this fissure, this feeling of being forced to be split into two people, mother and artist. And she does this by writing her Manifesto for Maintenance Art. In this manifesto, she writes about two systems, development and maintenance. Now, in the art world, and certainly at that time, the realm of art was development. It was creation, the new, the avant-garde, the individual artist expression, the revolutions. To undo this privileging of development over maintenance, Mierle asked a basic question. What about the dust? Once that genius artist creates their artwork, who's going to be there to fend off the never-ending accumulation of dust? Who's going to maintain it so that it can continue to be experienced? She asked it another way. She said, after the revolution, who's going to pick up the garbage on Monday morning? So she wrote about maintenance, and she wrote about art, and she began to perform maintenance as art. First at home, performing home maintenance and calling it art, assigning it the cultural value that comes with the word art. And then at the museum. Here we see her washing the floors, the street, the stairs, the entry to the museum, a performance that she did on her hands and knees in variable body positions for 8 hours for all museum visitors to see. She took this maintaining of the museum further, and this is great. She took the keys from the security guards and she began locking things up, keeping it safe. But she did it while it was open. So the visitors are locked in the galleries, the curators are locked in their offices, they're furious. But she made her point, right? She took these typically invisible, behind the scenes, unvalued processes and brought them into the light. She made what she called a life process of the museum visible. And she assigned it cultural value, giving value to the labor and the laborers who keep it clean, who keep it safe, like a mother. So we see that she took this notion of life process from her home to the museum. She then takes it to the street. So she's going from the individual to the group to the system, when she becomes the artist in residence with the New York City Department of Sanitation. For real. A position that she's had since 1977, which, by the way, she still holds. It's an unsalaried but official position. She did a 1.5 years of research getting to understand what the Department of Sanitation was. And then she devised a project called Touch Sanitation. And one of the projects within the series was called Handshake Ritual. And this is actually the first project of hers that I learned about, and it really moved me. So here's what she did. Over the span of 11 months, she traveled to all of New York City's 59 community districts in order to face and shake the hands of each of the 8,500 sanitation workers, to face them, to shake their hand and say, thank you for keeping New York City alive. seems like a small thing, right? Going around shaking hands. But what Mierle was trying to do, what she did do, was undo their sense of invisibility, their sense of stigma, and giving value to their work that is because of and for us. To state this in a material way, she took one of their trucks and transformed it into a fully mirror-clad drive-by artwork. You'd have no choice but to see yourself reflected in the body of that truck. As if to say, this is your garbage, this is our earth, this is our ecology. Now, why is all this important? What does all this artwork do for us here today? One great thing about Mierle's work and about art in general is that it can offer us a window into the history of movements and ideas. In the case of the artwork that we just looked at, it's a window into what was going on in the 70s and the 80s, in particular with the women's movement and with the environmental movement. Now, it makes sense that Mierle is studied as an environmental artist. Her work is about our responsibility to take care of the earth, to take care of each other. And it was created against the backdrop of the first Earth Day in 1970, the establishment of the EPA, Silent Spring. It makes sense to study her work as part of this larger cultural conversation. It equally makes sense to study her as a feminist artist. Remember, this is the time of second wave feminism. Women are bringing forward issues of family and workplace. Female artists are protesting for more representation in the art world. Mierle's work is about all of this. And it employs tactics that we now consider to be signature moves for feminist art. Tactics like personal narrative, this blurring of art and life, consciousness raising, and art as activism. So it makes sense that she's studied, that in this way, if you study art history, that these are the sorts of things that you'll know about her. She's a window into these movements, and that's great. But what I'd like to talk about now, and what I think is talked about less, is the extent to which her art is related to her Jewish upbringing and to Jewish ideas. Specifically, ideas around ritual, cleansing, and repair. And I think these are particularly important to understanding her work. And I think that her work also illuminates these ideas and can help us access them. It can help us learn about them. It can help us teach about them. So let's start with ritual. Jewish ritual has been described as taking the mundane and elevating it. We see this in the 16th century Lurianic Kabbalah. We see this in the tenets of Hasidism. For them, the idea is to engage with the material in order to connect with the divine. In a more secular or meditative way, elevating the mundane is about creating an attentiveness, a gratefulness to the everyday life. Take, for example, the tradition of making a blessing prior to consuming an apple. I'm about to do a mundane act, right? I'm going to eat an apple. But first, let me pause with a blessing and garner some attentiveness and gratefulness. I think Mierle's artwork is exactly about this. Her very pairing of the words maintenance and art is about elevating the seemingly mundane. It's about creating an attentiveness and a gratefulness, an ambition of Jewish ritual. Jewish ritual has also been described as being about embodying narrative. Cultural historians talk about this idea of embodying narrative in order to create a sense of peoplehood, doing a ritual act in order to feel a story, live a story. The classic example is the Pesach Seder, the Passover meal. The ritual is a retelling of the Exodus story, but it's also a reenactment of it. So, for example, the bitter herbs. The bitter herbs are consumed by the individual as a way to embody the collective story, the collective suffering of slavery. I think Mierle's artwork is doing a very similar thing. She's pointing to the individual embodiment of a larger narrative, this communal worldwide story of the care and labor that's essential for our survival. And she's pointing out how that larger story is distilled in the individual body, right? In the individual who keeps the dust off the art, the individual who sustains a baby, who keeps a city alive. So we can learn about embodying narrative and about elevating the mundane from Mierle's work, two ways of studying Jewish ritual. And I think that her work can also help us access this notion of kavanah, Jewish ritual intention. You see, Mierle described those 11 months of shaking hands with the words ritual and discipline. She says that she watched herself very closely so as not to turn it into a mechanical thing. It's boring. You're doing the same thing again and again, she has said. How do you stay attentive to such repetitive tasks? In other words, how do you engage in ritual in order to notice the mundane and elevate it? And then, how do you stay attentive in your ritual act, which by definition is repetitive? Another way of saying this, kavanah. how does one maintain Jewish ritual intention? We can see her handshake ritual as offering a new way to consider this notion of kavanah. It's a powerful, if unusual, illustration for an otherwise hard to describe term. Also hard to describe, the Jewish notion of ritual cleansing. Going from impure to pure, from tameh to tahol, that's something that's sort of hard to pin down, right? I think Mierle's work can help us access this abstract Jewish idea too. You see, she's created a body of work about the mikveh, the Jewish ritual immersion bath. This is the physical place in the Jewish tradition where this transition, this shift from impure to pure can manifest. She ties her mikveh art to her more well-known artwork that we looked at earlier. So she describes the mikveh as a communal spiritual sanitation system. That's an unusual word for it. Sanitation for spiritual immersion, for purification. I think it's an unusual and deliberate term that Mierle is using, that she's saying that her works are in fact connected. Perhaps to say, look at the volume and rhythms of a sanitation worker's labors, and you'll get a better understanding of the scale and ongoing practice of a Jewish woman's monthly ritual immersion. Perhaps to say, think of the important role one body can play in a larger narrative of keeping a city alive, and you can better understand how one body can connect to the larger Kehillah community, to the past and future of immersions, to the ritual of keeping the ritual immersion alive. Look at them to better understand yourself. Think of them as a mirror. Mierle has also offered literal mirrors for Jewish ideas too, particularly around the notion of Tikkun Olam, repairing or completing the world. Now, remember that mirrored truck? Mierle took this material and pushed it further in this installation, where she installed double-sided handheld mirrors on the wall with text that said, "My artwork is incomplete. I need you." Now, this is a play on the Lurianic Kabbalah, drawing on the mystical idea of Tikkun Olam, that humans are here to repair and complete the world. She's playing on this by asking the viewers to help complete her artwork. She's inviting them to first see themselves in the mirror, then to contemplate a tikkun act, an act of reparation, then to commit to it by writing it or drawing it and submitting it for display as part of the artwork. So what we have here, I think, is a useful physical expression for the biblical notion of the likeness of the Creator that you should see in your own reflection, and also for Tikkun Olam, for the contemplating and committing to the mystical co-creation of Tikkun Olam, another hard-to-describe Jewish term. So to summarize, we've seen that we can gain access to Jewish ideas in Mierle's art, that she creates art with explicitly Jewish terms, Jewish content, that she uses mystical and biblical texts and ideas to title and to describe her artwork, and that these ideas are then connected to her larger body of work. So I hope you can see that I think it's important to analyze her work in Jewish terms. I think it's equally important to consider her work when we think about how to access Jewish ideas, how to study them. Just as her artwork offers a window into environmentalism and feminism, I think her artwork equally offers a window into new pedagogical ways of accessing old Jewish ideas. It can be hard to teach about ideas like kavanah and ritual. And of course, we can benefit from traditional ways of learning about these through text study or through practice. But I think that Mierle's art offers an unexpected way in. It grabs our attention with its unlikely subjects and pairings. It offers simple questions that are at once accessible and wonderfully profound. It can help us see differently, consider and value differently, understand our place in an ecology differently. Now, I work in the field of public art, and I think of Mierle often as I work with artists who reveal the stewardship of our county workers, artists who tell our stories, like Mierle does, stories about us and stories about our place. I think of Mierle when I see waste being graciously diverted from our streets, when I look at my young daughter and think of the maintenance work that her father and I do to sustain her. I think we can all think about Mierle in what she calls our home maintenance, our city maintenance, our earth maintenance. In our daily lives, we can think of her, and we should. But I'd like for us to also think of her, to think of art, when we consider how to access and how to study Jewish ideas. Thank you.